There we go. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and kick us off now that we're recording. Hopefully everyone got your notification. This meeting is being recorded. Good morning. My name is Julia Wallerce. I am the Assistant Director of Transportation here at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC, and I'm very excited to introduce today's program, Going Green, how the MBTA is taking climate action. I'll introduce our speakers, go over a little bit of the ground rules. I'll also be moderating the question and answer section of this event after our presentations. As you log in and get set up, we'd ask if folks can name yourself in your tile window. You should have those controls, just your name and affiliation and pronouns if you like. We do have the chat disabled so as to not cause distractions. But when we move into the question and answer portion of our program, we'll ask you to raise your hands and give you the authority to unmute and go ahead and ask your questions. So no raising hands, please, during the presentation, but we will hopefully leave ample time for that for the last 20 or so minutes of the event. So without further ado, I will go ahead and move us through to our first intro slides. The next slide is sort of informed you already. This is being recorded. You'll get a link to the recording after this event, as well as people who registered and weren't able to attend. But thanks to everyone who is here today. So excited for the interest in this event. Next slide. So we are the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC, and we serve the 101 cities and towns around Greater Boston. And we are guided by the work of our regional plan, MetroCommon 2050, which really sets a roadway towards engaging the region in a more equitable and resilient future. In MetroCommon 2050, you can find that online. Inclusive growth and mobility is probably the most relevant to today's event. We do outline recommendations that focus on investing and expanding our public and active transportation systems in order to support affordable, reliable, and safer connections to jobs and homes. So that's MAPC. Next slide, please. So we have an excellent planner of speakers today. We were very excited for this partnership with the MBTA, who we work very closely with, and are actually using this opportunity for them to sort of tell their story about how the T in transit is not just a climate solution in itself by way of mode shift and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also what is the T doing to keep its enormous portfolio of assets safe as we head into extreme weather and climate change, and what is being planned to evaluate and to keep the agency on a path towards resilience in a future of climate change. So our speakers today are Lynsey Heffernan, Chief of Policy and Strategic Planning with the MBTA. We have Eshel, the Senior Director of Climate Policy and Planning with the T. Caroline Bean, the Director of Climate and Sustainability Planning at the T. And a few words from Bourassa, our Director here at MAPC, to talk about how we work with municipalities on climate action plans and resilience. And myself, Julia Wallerce, we moderating the session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Eric.
Thank you, Julia. Good morning, everyone. As Julia said, I'm Eric Bourassa. I'm the Director of Transportation at MAPC, and I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about MAPC's climate resilience and decarbonization planning. We take a very interdisciplinary approach at MAPC. We work on climate across multiple departments: our clean energy, public health, environment, transportation, land use, housing, and in fact, many other departments at MAPC work on climate-related work. A lot of it is focused on helping cities and towns with local and sort of sub-regional planning. We do clean energy and climate plans, hazard mitigation plans. We've developed climate resilience design standards. We do a lot of work in the extreme heat area and how to mitigate that, coastal flood plans. We're doing a lot of work in electrification right now, municipal fleets and personal vehicles. So we're doing a lot, and the MBTA is a major partner in this work, and we're very excited to hear more about what they're doing. We also work on statewide policy as well. We sit on a number of commissions and councils that are focused on how we're moving our clean energy supply system to be clean and resilient, how we're electrifying our mobility systems, and how we're making sure that our buildings are electrified, highly efficient, and affordable as well. Next slide. One of the major initiatives that we are overseeing as an agency is the Greater Boston Climate Action Plan. This is a plan that involves 167 communities in Eastern Massachusetts and Southern New Hampshire. MAPC was awarded a grant this past year from EPA to conduct this comprehensive climate action plan. It will set regional emission reduction goals for 2030 and 2050. It includes a regional greenhouse gas inventory. And we're really kicking this off this fall. And so we can post this link in the chat, but we'd love to have folks get involved, and you can find out how to do that. That will then help us be able to be eligible for additional funds in the region to then implement this plan with identified very implementable action steps at the local level. Also want to highlight, next slide, a number of resources, research and toolkits that MAPC has developed recently. We've done a lot of work, like I said, in the heat space. So we've created a land surface temperature index that's been mapped by the region and the state. And again, we're going to send out these slides at the end, and people can have access to all these links and resources on our website. We've developed a heat in schools policy. We've created heat maps in partnership with Wicked Hot Mystic and Metro West Heat Watch. Last year, we created a report on stormwater flooding, water everywhere. We've developed resilient land use toolkits that we've updated most recently. We've created resilience and sustainable and affordable design standards for residential and mixed use development. We've done a lot of work in the public health sort of space, focused on the social determinants of health and extreme heat. And we're working in partnership with the city of Cambridge to incorporate climate readiness and competency into local public health outreach and coordination. So a lot of cross-cutting work at MAPC in the climate space. And I will turn it back to Julia.
Thanks, Eric. So we're now going to move into presentations from our partners at the T to really tell this story and help us all understand more about what's going on in the agency. We hear so much about track replacements and safety and state of good repair, but what does that look like in the context of climate? And I know that's on a lot of our minds, at least certainly mine, in the wake of recent news and events in North Carolina and throughout the nation. What if that happens here? Are we ready? And what is our transit agency that we all rely on in so many different ways doing to keep us safe? So I will hand it over to Lynsey, and I think Kat has those slides that she can pull up for us.
Excellent. Well, while Kat pulls this up, I want to thank you so much, Julia and Eric and Adi, who I know is here, and others from MAPC for hosting this event. I'm thrilled with the turnout, and it does really speak to the necessary coordination between MAPC and the MBTA as a regional transit authority to kind of think about how can we do better work together and engage an audience who really cares about all of this work. As was mentioned, I'm the Chief of Policy and Strategic Planning. I oversee our planning functions at the T, including our strategic planning work and our capital planning work. We have 75,000 assets at the T, whether it's like in this picture here, a piece of track, a signal system, this is a flood door, but all of our vehicles, our passenger facilities, every staircase and every escalator, all of them need attention at any given day. So our work in climate planning, however, is really part of a pivot to take a strategic approach and setting ourselves long-term to be able to deliver excellent service by taking that long-range view on climate as well. We invest in a state of good repair, and we need to do that every single year, but thinking about how we could build back better and how we can make sure that transit really is the mode of choice for the future. I think you can go to the next slide. So climate is in our strategic plan. These are our 8 goals in our strategic plan. And we include sustainability as one of our values as well, where we wanted to make sure that we are taking care to ensure that both climate, that you can see increasing environmental sustainability, and the resilience of our transit system is core to our goals. But we also want to attract new riders, right? And increase the percentage of transit trip making in the region. We know that when more people are on transit, transit is a climate solution, that mostly what we're doing is taking people out of cars. And so that is certainly very important to us. These values sort of tie hand in hand to earlier on in this list. You can also see that we need to modernize our assets and improve connectivity, and modernizing those assets needs to be done with an eye towards the future changes in the climate and how we are going to adapt. I think we can go to the next slide, Kat. So the reason why I want to emphasize the goal of increasing ridership is because when we talk about climate action in the context of the MBTA, we first have to talk about our role as a transit agency to support the mass movement of persons throughout the Boston region. That increasing ridership we know is so critically important. And so our second pillar is the sustainability at the MBTA, our second pillar of sustainability is resilience. At the MBTA, resilience really is reliability. By adapting our infrastructure to present and future climate hazards and prepping emergency response, we can minimize disruptions and restore service faster. So you mentioned North Carolina, right? How do we make sure that if a storm like that hits us, that we are prepared to continue to run service and that we're making smart choices for the future. And then our third pillar, of course, is to work on our own emissions and reducing our emissions and our environmental impact through the MBTA's operations. Often thought about as how do we think about decarbonized service, but making sure that we are trying as hard as we can to be friendly to the environment while we're providing for the movement of tens of thousands of people. With the release of our strategic plan, we also announced around this time last year that we would be creating a new Office of Climate Policy and Planning. And we started a process to identify key next steps that would be implemented by this team. So I want to move to the next slide and make sure we introduce some of our colleagues here. We know, before I do that, fundamentally, this photo is a beautiful one of commuter rail and a bridge that I look at and think about, how old is that bridge? That we are integrating all of our climate priorities into our long-range planning, that getting more people on the system, that means running more frequent service, ultimately helps to move people out of cars, that we want to articulate that version, that vision of what we want for the future, and ensure that those mobility goals connected to the state's long-range transportation plan, that we are part of that solution. At the same time, investing in a state of good repair to improve the reliability of our system. Many know we released a capital needs assessment a year ago. The cost to bring all of our services into a state of good repair is high, and the need for the MBTA to continue to work on our asset management side of the house to ensure that we understand the criticality of our assets and are making smart investment decisions to ensure that future reliability. And then, of course, we could not do this work alone, right? MBTA cannot address and respond to the changes of climate without working with other folks who are thinking about our watersheds, without thinking about heat. I saw your report about heat in schools, right? We're providing service for Boston Public School students every single day and many other schools as well. And so how do we think about our partnerships that ultimately are going to strengthen that service and will grow ridership? And so if we move to the next slide, I want to take a moment and introduce our team and also make sure you all have access to this climate assessment report that was released. Kat and Caroline from our climate team are here to sort of walk through that assessment with you and talk about some of our next steps. This work is really deeply connected to other planning activities at the MBTA. In particular, I want to make sure that folks are aware that MassDOT will soon be launching our next 25-year capital plan, which is called the Program for Mass Transit. That is updated every 5 years. Its last iteration was known as Focus 40. And that will be looking at a time horizon of 2050, and which aligns to many of the state goals around climate. It'll be a wonderful opportunity for the public to engage as well and talk about what it is that you are interested in seeing for the MBTA. Again, that is a project that the MBTA and MassDOT conduct together, and will be lengthy, but will be designed to ensure that we hear the feedback from folks about what people are really looking for, whether our riders today, our riders for the future, taxpayers in the Commonwealth. It'll be a great opportunity for folks to engage. So well, I'm going to turn it over to Kat in just a second. I do want to really restate my thanks to MAPC for hosting us and evidencing this regional collaboration and partnership. We could not do this work alone, whether it is municipalities helping us with bus lanes to make sure our buses move faster, whether it's working with RTAs on coordinating schedules to ensure that we have connectivity, and with advocacy and community groups to make sure we're responding to the needs of some of our most vulnerable riders. So our success is deeply connected to the feedback from everybody in the region, and we hope to continue to build on that as we move deeper and deeper into this climate space in particular. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Kat, to take it away from here.
All right. Thank you very much, Lynsey, and echoing again your thanks to MAPC for hosting us today. So we're here really today to provide an overview of the climate assessment released last Thursday. And we're just excited to just walk through a little bit of how the MBTA is thinking about and approaching climate initiatives. So the assessment is now online and available at mbta.com/sustainability. And this work is going to be led by a new team, as Lynsey acknowledged. So since we're all new recruits to the MBTA, I want to take a moment to show who's on the team so you can put faces to names ahead of what we hope are going to be many, many future conversations. So for those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Eshel. I started at the MBTA in April, and I see a lot of familiar names and faces from my time prior to the MBTA, where I spent 6 years at the city of Boston in a few different roles. Most of those recently working as Chief of Staff for the Mayor's Office of Environment, Energy, and Open Space. And I'm delighted to be joined by Caroline Bean, who you'll hear from later on, who started this past June as our director on the planning side. And prior to joining our team, she actually ran Missoula County's climate program out west. And one of the projects that she worked on while out there was actually implementing a county-wide climate resilience plan. And we're also joined by Alex Oster, who's our director on the policy side, who joined us most recently from Boston Public Schools, where she oversaw our school bus electrification initiative. And then prior to BPS, she had spent a decade at the Volpe Center working on climate and environmental policy and planning initiatives at the federal level. So we're staffing up and thought that we would just take a moment to just put humans on a page, because it's really about that and being able to start conversations with one another. So to give you a sense of the process that we undertook, so our team was created, and then we, some folks across the MBTA sort of immediately started a process to take stock of what we've already done, what commitments we have at a state level, and to start charting out what the next steps would be, essentially a to-do list for our new team. So we worked, so the strategic transit planning team, which is in our same division, worked really closely with our environmental department as well as our law department. We had contracted with Foley Hoag and Arup to really do an exhaustive review of all of the various documents and plans that are in place at the state level related to climate, as well as a wide range of regulations and policies, just making sure that we're dotting all of our I's and crossing our T's. We also did a lot of internal engagement in this process with a variety of workshops with folks from all across our agency, from people in our engineering and maintenance facility to capital delivery, to safety, to accessibility, and a whole bunch of folks in between. And that resulted in the climate assessment that's available online, which first takes stock again of that legal policy and planning framework for the context in which the MBTA is operating, taking stock as well of what we've done to date and what's underway, setting a vision for what it means for the MBTA to be sustainable and resilient, and then charting out next steps across 5 main focus areas across planning and prioritization, what's needed on the organizational workforce side, thinking about how we embed sustainability and resilience into more of our processes, some additional analysis that's still left to be done, and how we want to start thinking about being a stronger regional partner and how we're going to coordinate externally, but also think about how we communicate internally and make all of our operators, employees aware of the role that they play as operators of a public transit system that is a climate solution. So bringing this graphic back, so as noted by Lynsey, a critical part of that climate assessment really is our vision for climate work at the MBTA. So by undertaking climate initiatives, the MBTA really becomes a climate solution twice over. First, by providing those critical transit services, and we're hoping to also make transit the mode of choice and deepen that impact. But then second, by making those services resilient, reliable, and sustainable. And that really just only goes to deepen the climate benefits of public transportation. The work that we will undertake to protect our transit system, as well as our employees, our riders, and our operations, to be resilient in the face of both present day, but also future climate hazards, that work is going to help make our transit system more reliable to ride. And we know that reliability is so critical to growing our ridership. So then decarbonizing those services really just goes to further enhance those carbon reductions. What we mean when we say that transit is a climate solution is that the MBTA already provides major carbon reductions. So generally speaking, the MBTA represents less than 2% of the statewide transportation sector emissions, but we account for approximately 10% of commuter trips in the greater Boston area. So the sort of metropolitan statistical area. And so already we have an outsized benefit in terms of the amount of people that were able to move around while contributing relatively little to the statewide emissions. So there are two implications. First, running really good service is really important so that we can continue to serve the people who are already riding the system well. But again, it just serves to further underscore that taking action to reduce our emissions really only positively enhances that impact that the MBTA already has on our region and the Commonwealth. I also want to take a moment, Lynsey acknowledged this, but we have a lot of infrastructure that helps us deliver that service. So while we serve almost 180 towns, that relies on over 75,000 individual assets. And when I talk about assets, it can be something as small as a wayside switch to a bridge or a culvert to a substation. That helps us serve approximately 1 million trips. It was 1.3 million. That's pre-pandemic. So we're really fighting to get that ridership back. But this relies on hundreds of miles of track, both on our rapid transit system and our commuter rail system. We have hundreds of rail vehicles, almost 1,500 sort of bus type vehicles. We also run ferry service and are growing that fleet, as well as operating the ride. This also doesn't show all the supporting infrastructure that is so vital to delivering that service, all of our employee and maintenance facilities to maintain those vehicles, the power systems that help run our rapid transit system, and that will need to grow and grow both in capacity and resilience and redundancy if we are going to electrify our service. It relies on bridges and tunnels and so many more types of assets that go towards delivering that service. And those diverse assets are also exposed to several major climate hazards. So we wanted to take a moment just to raise awareness of some of the hazards that we're thinking of. For us, it's our top risks really are coastal flooding, extreme temperatures at both ends of the temperature spectrum, extreme rain, and heavy winds. And just want to take a moment to emphasize that these are not future hazards. We're already experiencing many of them today. So Winter Storm Grayson, pictured on the far left, had caused $3.5 million in flood damage at Aquarium Station alone in 2018. And our potential losses could become much greater in future years. And that doesn't include damages from heavy rain. We experienced flash flooding in places like Leominster around this time last year. And it's been really devastating seeing the impact in places in North Carolina. So flash flooding and inland flooding is definitely a really big concern for us. We also, as I said, have to navigate both ends of the temperature spectrum. In 2015, we received over 100 inches of snow in less than a month. And that really shut down a lot of our system and kickstarted a lot of the MBTA's work on climate preparedness. During extreme heat, this happened this past summer, we may have to run slower train service because of track buckling, and which could potentially cause derailments. Heat obviously also impacts worker safety. It can also impact some of our delicate equipment like signal and communications equipment that can be really sensitive to temperature. Finally, heavy winds can be a major risk because they can damage overhead catenary, or they can also do things just like blow vegetation onto the right of way, which again presents a safety hazard. And so it's worth noting that addressing those hazards, it limits damage, but it can also really support decarbonization. So going back again to my example of power, as we adopt more battery electric technologies and we make more of our systems dependent on electric power supply, all the work done to make power supply reliable with redundant power sources and feeds, that helps prevent or limit outages, and it helps us run reliable service. So resilience really is critical both on sort of reliability and helping support improved ridership. It's also very critical on the decarbonization side. In terms of just at a very high level, some of what's also driving us to take action, not only are we responding to climate risk, but we also have several commitments at a state level. So this includes things like developing facility decarbonization plans. It includes implementing a system-wide tunnel flood mitigation program. There's also a requirement to have a zero-emission passenger bus fleet by 2040. Doing things like installing EV chargers at some of our lots. And generally, working on ongoing reporting of emissions and other types of environmental reporting. So there are many reasons for us to take action. But we have both opportunities and to take advantage of, and there are also major constraints as we take climate action. So the assessment also really wanted to just take a moment to take stock of those. So we have to respond to those future climate risks, but we also know that as we think about our future system, there's going to be population growth, there's going to be migration that might have implications for how we go about climate planning. We have a big opportunity to benefit from the greening of the grid, but as we electrify some of our transit services, we're competing with growing demand for clean electricity across all of our sectors. And finally, while there are federal funding opportunities, we also have significant state of good repair needs. And so it's worth noting that as we prioritize a state of good repair that supports running high quality service with our existing assets, there's built-in resilience in that work. And sometimes there's also an opportunity to improve incrementally. So an example of that is our power division has been trying to take advantage of diversions to improve lighting in a few stations, upgrading to efficient LEDs, but more broadly, to achieve a decarbonized and resilient MBTA, we have to have additional investments beyond a state of good repair. And that means that sometimes we are competing with legally mandated requirements and other types of competing priorities. As we do this work, it's exciting that we're actually building on about a decade of sort of dedicated work in this space. So we are going to be working closely with the environmental department, but they've already been able to achieve a 44% emissions reduction since 2009 through a lot of energy efficiency work and fuel economy work. We've also developed climate vulnerability assessments for a lot of our system, still more to do. And we launched major decarbonization initiatives for some of our fleet already. A couple of those initiatives that are underway. Our team is really just going to be working to catalyze a lot of this work and help clear the way. There's a lot happening in the building efficiency space. We have a lot of exciting work happening in decarbonization. I'm sure a lot of folks saw the news about the pilot of electrification on the Fairmont line as a very recent example of something new that's been launched. And then we have a lot of exciting work happening in the resilience space as well, particularly advancing our system-wide tunnel flood mitigation program, which is obviously top of mind now, given all the devastation happening with Hurricane Helene. And so this is just an excerpt of some of the next steps that are identified in the climate assessment. What we've done is really try to just chart some of those next steps and pathways forward. There will be additional, more detailed planning work that will happen. So this is really just a jumping off point. And we hope that as you take a moment to review what's coming, that you see opportunities to collaborate. But for now, I'm going to hand it off to Caroline to just go over some of our nearer term next steps, more focused on the planning side of things. So Caroline.
Thank you, Kat. And thank you again, MAPC, for having us. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. I have a bit of a tickle in my throat, but I've got tea and water, so should be good to go, but bear with me in case I begin coughing. So as Kat mentioned, this lays out the high level priorities that we have moving forward from the climate assessment. And I'm going to talk more about the planning and prioritization pieces in terms of next steps. So next slide, Kat. Great. So, I was going to say that we're going to focus on the development of a system-wide resilience plan here. And one of the reasons we wanted to share more about our next steps for planning prioritization with you all is not just because of the audience that's here and we thought it would be of interest, but because this work that we're about to embark on in terms of planning is really going to set the foundation for so many other pieces of the assessment next steps. How we identify priorities in terms of resilience investment is going to inform our organizational and workforce needs. It's going to relate to how we approach future vulnerability assessments and quantify the amount of economic infusion that's needed into the system, as well as obviously inform the way we engage and communicate with you all and the way you will engage and communicate with us. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about some of the key priorities that we have as we begin to do this work. So the resilience roadmap or system-wide resiliency plan, we're still thinking about what exactly we will call it, is going to be the priority for fiscal year 25. We're going to start in the next couple of weeks beginning this process and anticipate it'll take us through the fiscal year, and it'll spur many conversations with you all. So a few high-level things that we're anticipating will be a part of this process is to first off build on that body of work that Kat articulated so well. Our environmental department has spent a lot of time doing really complex and thorough vulnerability assessments of many, not quite all of our assets, but many of our assets. And we want to make sure that those really detailed analyses are speaking to each other, that they're crosswalked, and that we can really understand what is the top level priority for us, or priorities, realistically speaking. So crosswalking will be a key first step. We also want to make sure that this plan sets very clear goals and targets for the near, medium, and long term, both so that we can ensure that we're making progress internally and holding ourselves accountable, but also so that we have clear goals that we can communicate with you all and that you can understand what our priorities are for the next 2, 5, 10 years when it comes to climate resilience. Another piece, and I think it's been a part of this conversation so far today, is thinking about the true life cycle costs of these investments as well. So not just in terms of what energy will it use later on and factoring that into the life cycle costs, but what anticipated flooding exposure does an asset have? How can we protect it now so that we can avoid future damage costs later on? And making sure we're beginning to include that type of analysis from the beginning and including it in the engineering and design of projects as we pursue them. Of course, we want to work closely with external and internal partners. And we know we're going to need to iterate on this. We're not going to get it right or get it perfect the first time. So that will be a key principle of this work. And also to do this work as holistically as possible. It's a really integrated web. Once you touch one piece of resiliency of the system, you might be touching other pieces too. And so while we want to stay focused on each individual task, we also want to make sure that we're not ignoring those interconnections as well. So that will be another principle. And next slide. And so to speak to some of those interconnections, I wanted to first just lay out a pretty simple, relatively speaking, diagram of all of the existing work that's going on in this space. So I mentioned the climate change vulnerability assessments. There's many of those that have been done that will feed into this system-wide resilience plan. There's also a need to update emergency response plans. On the decarbonization side, we have several ongoing planning efforts related to power, facilities, commuter rail. We're looking at electrification for ferry and non-revenue vehicles. So there's a lot of existing work going on in this space. And as a caveat, not all of these plans are explicitly focused on just climate change or just how these these assets interact with climate change. But climate is a key piece of it, and it is a thread that weaves throughout all of these plans. And so this is laid out in a more simple format, but once you begin looking at the inputs and outputs of each of these plans, the partners that are involved in it, on the next slide, you see just how integrated it is. It is truly a web of colors moving back and forth. And so we need to make sure that we are really centering this, these interconnections as we move forward, and making sure that we're having the right pieces of the organization talking to one another, that we're connecting external partners into relevant pieces as needed as well. And so this will be a centerpiece of the work moving forward too. Next slide. And then lastly, I wanted to speak a little bit more to partnerships, since that will be just a key piece as we move forward here. And this is from the climate assessment directly. We know we need partnerships with our utilities as we plan for future power needs, as our fleet expands and as we electrify. It's been mentioned that there's going to be a tremendous amount of investment needed to do these changes as well. And so we know we need strong coordination with the state, federal partners, of course, all of our regional and municipal partners on the ground as well. It's been a key talking point here too. We need the funding in order to achieve a resilient and carbon neutral system, and that will come from myriad sources and partnerships. And of course, we want to make sure that we're working again with all of you, so that we know that as we increase transit rides, as we move towards mode shift, and we really center this message of resilience is reliability, we know that we can increase transit trips in the region and have that doubling impact of transit as a climate solution. And so as we move forward, as it's been mentioned, we're a newer office. We're really excited to work with all of you. We hope that you invite us to your next meetings or future meetings. We understand that how we all work together might be individually unique with each group, and so we want to begin having those conversations with you all, figuring out the ways we can work together and collaborate. And just personally, I am newly back to the Boston area, so I would love to meet all of you as well. If you want to reach out to me directly to have coffee or go for a walk, I would love to hear more about why working with the MBTA is important to you. So please do reach out to one or all of us. Get involved with the PMT, as Lynsey mentioned. And please stay in touch, because we anticipate there will be lots of opportunities to collaborate moving forward. And so we want to have your input and thoughts and concerns moving forward. And so with that, I will transition it back to Kat, who's going to remind us of the link to see the climate assessment. And I believe we'll take questions after that. Thank you.
Couldn't have said it better. Thank you, Caroline. Yes, echoing that desire to go on many, many walks, I hope, and be able to walk parts of the system together potentially. So again, finally, the assessment's available right now at mbta.com/sustainability. And we're looking forward to getting into some questions. So I'll just turn it right back over to Julia.
Thank you so much, Kat and Lynsey and Caroline. It's a really great presentation, and definitely sort of underscores our reason for wanting to do this event, to do just what you said, put in a human face behind this really relatively new team at the T that is there to work with you in whatever capacity in your municipality, your organization, or as an advocate in your community. So I hope that those presentations provided some insights and inspiration for how you can do exactly that in your town, in whatever capacity that you're served by the MBTA.
Can I add one piece to that too? I don't want anyone to misconstrue. The MBTA has had a large and robust environmental team for years. And so it is not that we are new to this space. We've been thinking about how to green ourselves. We've been thinking about our impacts on the environment. We've been thinking about how to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels, et cetera. I think what is new is we are building a better longer range planning team, both for transit, but also in this case, specifically around climate. And so I don't want my partners in the environmental team who are sort of on the grounds and thinking about our environmental compliance and where we get our power from, and are thinking about really critical and important questions for that to be misunderstood. I think we are adding additional capacity to be better regional partners, because these issues, as has been said, cannot be tackled alone and need stronger partnerships. And so we hope to, as Caroline's going to get a lot of coffee, I'm excited. She may regret having offered that, and that would be a great thing, right? Because we need stronger partnerships to deal with some of the bigger threats that exist today. So sorry to interrupt you.
No, thank you for clarifying that. And I apologize if I gave the indication that this was completely new territory for the team. But we're so lucky that there's more capacity and that we have a team like this here to work with us in the field. So I do see some questions in the audience. I just want to kick us off with some of the questions that participants entered when you registered for this event. And it was actually really hard to choose. We had over 200 registrations, and give or take half of those people asked questions. So just going to pull a couple and then do some live questions. So this could be really for any of you at MBTA, but what would a climate-proof MBTA look like? And how is the T reducing exposure to extreme weather while expanding service and other investments?
Kat, can I start that one? And then I'm happy to have you jump in. I think I want to be realistic, right? We are a transit agency that is facing a $700 million operating deficit next year. Climate proofing, I don't think any of us quite knows what that means, right? Being smart and being responsive to the things that we see that are changing and that are presenting challenges to us is sort of the direction we're trying to go. Installing, I'm thinking, Kat, putting in those portal doors reduces the impact of potentially stormwater. It doesn't eliminate it completely, right? Making sure that we have pump systems that work make a lot of sense. I want to balance, like, even as we want to make some of these changes, sometimes they have rider impacts just to install or do or construct, and we have to balance how many rider facing impacts that means shutting down the system to do the work and taking away weekend service. And we are constantly balancing the investments that we want to make and the impacts to riders at the same time. Clearly, over the last year, a lot of effort in the maintenance and reliability and the track system has been a key focus. But anytime we're trying to invest at the T, we're always thinking about, well, what's that going to mean for riders tomorrow who need the T to get to work, right? And are we going to push them into a car? Are we going to have them take an Uber because of that, right? These are all interconnected challenges. And so I think it is, I want to level set. I don't know what climate proof is. I think being climate smart is maybe where we're trying to get to, or we need some other moniker to kind of get to a place where we are making investments that people feel good about, that people feel like are savvy to the changing conditions and are also providing us sometimes some flexibility for the future. Well, if we, let's build this such that we could also do this in the future if we needed to. So let's build a building and think about the roof, and maybe we can't afford solar panels today, but we could build it such that it could withstand the weight of solar panels in the future, right? Or something along those lines. So, Kat, I don't know if you have something you want to add to that, or Caroline, please feel free.
Yeah, I guess very briefly, I think one of the things that might be challenging for us to communicate in the future is that I think a lot of that climate resilience is going to be hidden from the public. A lot of our assets are very deep in our tunnels, or they might be hidden in plain sight, but you don't realize that what you're walking past is a piece of MBTA infrastructure. So I'm thinking about Lynsey mentioned tunnel portals, so literally being able to close off the tunnel so that we don't get more water into it, but we also really rely on pump rooms that help remove water from our tunnels. And so we're working on a state of good repair program for those for that infrastructure, but none of that is visible to the public. Same thing for our power infrastructure. We have hundreds of miles of cable that runs through our tunnels and through Boston streets in particular, and all of that is underground. It's invisible, but it is so critical to the reliability of our system. So a lot of it, I think, might be hidden in plain sight. Some of it might mean that you're seeing more deployables like the aquarium flood planks. You might not necessarily get to see them because we're deploying them when we expect flooding. So hopefully people are sheltering in a safe place and not walking about trying to catch a glimpse of our deployables. But that's why we're excited to also be in partnership with municipalities like Boston, which just did a deployables day to raise awareness of flood mitigation solutions.
I was going to say that word in my mind recently. There was deployables day.
This past Friday. exactly. But I think it'll be up to us as well to be able to tell that story a little bit better through the resilience planning that we'll be doing. Yeah.
So this is a bit of a shift in question, a service related question rather than necessarily infrastructure, but we know that, you know, safety, reliability, accessibility, frequency are key drivers of mode shift and of ridership, of getting people on the trains and buses and ferries. So what are the considerations for increased frequency, and how can a municipality help push and support such a need?
So I think frequency, you're totally right. When we survey riders, nationally, you survey riders who take transit, the number one and two go together. They want to be frequent and want to be reliable. Right,
right behind you on the whiteboard has some
exactly.
of these, actually.
Oh, I should clean my whiteboard before I do a webinar. But those that are just so critically important, right? And so increasing frequency is hugely important. And I want to say, when we think about that, we think about the many things that go into frequency. So if, for instance, we want to talk about a community that is served by our heavy rail system, heavy rail red, orange, and blue lines, right? What is that going to look like? Okay, well, we need to have a track that will allow us to run faster trains. That means getting rid of slow zones, big focus in the last year. That means we need more operators, because if you run more trains, you need more people. And so that means expanding your operator headcount, which means is an operating budget. Do we have enough space? Are we hiring enough? Are we promoting at the right rates? Do we have enough training schools? Do we have enough maintenance staff to deal with the greater frequency? And then there's a third component there. Do we have enough vehicles? And so red and orange line, most people who are on those lines know there's some new cars in the system and there's some not so new cars in the system. And as we get more new cars in the system, they are more reliable, getting the older cars off the system. And ultimately we'll be adding vehicle capacity, right? And so then we can run more trains on that system. When I think about our bus network, though, that's quite different, right? How do we run more bus service? Well, similarly, we need to have enough vehicles. We need to have more operators, particularly to run as we're getting close to implementing phase 1 of bus network redesign. We've increased our operator headcount, which is really exciting for communities north of Boston that will be part of phase 1. More frequency means things like running on weekends, maybe routes that we don't run on the weekends, or running late at night or early morning. For bus, rather than an infrastructure that is track, it's an infrastructure that is public roadways. And so how do public roadways support our having increased frequency? So just if we have enough buses and maintenance facilities and I have enough operators, if they're all stuck in traffic, the rider experience is no good. And so that's things like signal priority and bus lanes, right? And so I think depending on the community that is served, that could look different. Commuter rail is another tale in of itself, right? Commuter rail, for us we are actively working on a greater commuter rail frequency, right? We are thinking about whether we have on the vehicle side enough locomotives, enough coaches. Coaches expand capacity pretty greatly. Getting rid of single level coaches and running all double level coaches is a goal that we have that doubles your capacity, and then you need more locomotives. But having greater frequency on those services often means us looking at infrastructure locations where we maybe only have a single track, and that's slowing down service along the whole line. So if there's a pinch point on the system, we may need to do some investments to think about double tracking projects such that we're not trains aren't being slowed down either artificially or in a way that we can't manage as just with the schedule. All of those, if you're a community, engaging with the next program for mass transit is sort of a really important place. Like tell us and because that is part of also telling our story about what our needs are, so we can articulate on the operating side, here's what we're going to need in terms of headcount and people and maintenance staff, but also on the capital side, here's what we're going to need to kind of get to those locations. And so while we are working to articulate that vision for folks and we want people to buy into it, we need to also hear back from the public if we're getting it right and if we're moving in the correct direction.
Great, very thorough. I know it's not easy. We have about 10 minutes left, and I see a couple of questions in the audience I think we have time to address. So first, I'll go ahead and ask you to unmute Laura Evans, who I can't see the full identity, but you're a select board member somewhere. So Laura, what is your question?
Yeah, hi, I'm Laura Evans, select board member, newly elected in Rockport, Massachusetts. And I wonder, we are at the end of the line. And when I was running for office in spring, I have to say one of the key issues was idling trains. Frequently, we have 4 idling trains up here in Rockport, our beautiful little seaside community, which is creating a lot of pollution and noise. And we did have a consent decree back in 2010 and bought big batteries so the trains could get plugged in. And sometimes they're plugged in and sometimes they're not. And they run. Just Sunday night, I was walking around the train yard with one of the residents. The residents have organized, and they're and rightly so, complaining about this. The HVAC is on, the lights are on, the steady drone, and somebody has measured as high as 100 decibels there around in the neighborhood around there. And we're really hoping the MBTA will work with us to reduce the noise and particulate pollution. And the citizens have organized, actually, Caroline Bean, I'd like to take you up on your offer to come visit us on November 2nd at 10:30. They've organized a session at the library about idling trains. And it would be so great to have a presence there. And we can walk on the beach after, before, not during, but we really, really welcome your participation. And I don't want to just be a complainer. We want to work with you. We really look forward to electric trains bringing tourists to Rockport, and hope we can collaborate soon on coming up with what seems like, a personnel or an admin issue that should be soluble, I would hope. Thank you.
No, it's wonderful to meet you. Congratulations on your election.
Thank you.
And Select Board Evans, I would welcome making sure that we have that conversation both with Caroline and members from our railroad operations team. Idling trains is a complex problem, and more. It seems like you should shut the trains off. And so I will say the little bit that I know, which is maybe dangerous, Ms. Evans, but we're happy to do a follow-up conversation. We have particular rules at the MBTA when we turn trains. So a place like Rockport, that is the end of the line, is when the train is turning around. Some of that is about checking our brakes, making sure we're prepared for the next run. Some of that is dictated by the FRA. As was noted, though, there are times and opportunities where those trains can and should be turned off, and or where batteries can be used to keep the engines warm, so that cooled engines don't run well and are inefficient. And so that is part of the potential solution. I'm happy to make sure that we have a follow-up conversation. And if Julia, if you have Ms. Evans' email in her registration and you can connect us, we can make sure that we can get that meeting on the books. And hopefully Caroline can join your meeting and talk about some of these things as well, or set something up in the really near term, because I was not aware of your consent decree, but happy to have a conversation and make sure we can figure out if there's ways for us to mitigate the impact. If I pivot to your hope for electric trains and electrified rail, I mean, that is absolutely a space where the team wants to move to. Electrified rail gives us a better service for riders. It's quieter. There you go. People like that more. Also doesn't of course have the diesel emission concerns. Generally speaking, we're running shorter and more frequent trains is sort of the design, and we are very excited at the MBTA to be piloting our first electrified service on the Fairmount line. We announced that just in the last couple of months. The Fairmount line is a good place for us to begin this work with a battery electric unit, multiple units, BEMUs. Those are Fairmount line is a good place to start, largely because it's a 10-mile corridor that's relatively contained. And so we can learn a lot and then figure out how to expand to the rest of our network, which is quite vast. Kat may know how many miles we have, but it's a lot on the commuter rail. And then obviously it should be said, the rest of our train network is electrified, right? All of the subway runs on electricity. And so this is about figuring out how to move commuter rail in that direction, regional rail across the country. People are making interesting innovations at Caltrain. We're talking to folks in Chicago, understanding what their going source, what power sources they're using, how are they thinking about it. Our Fairmount line, the battery electric EMU trains will charge. They need a new vehicle maintenance facility. Everybody, as much as they don't love the end of the terminus trains, I will say, Ms. Evans, they also don't like maintenance facilities. So it's another siting challenge sometimes the T has. We have to get a maintenance facility for new trains. They are quieter, so that might help. But then they also will be powered before they run, have catenary, but the reason that sort of more unique than some ideas that we'd had before, where if we hung catenary wire throughout the entire commuter rail network, one, it would cost us an absolute fortune. Two, there are many people who locally would oppose that, who are not interested in the wires. The wires also present problems and storms and trees down. And so these run with power. And then when we don't have the ability to have catenary wire, they switch and run on battery. And then when they have catenary, they can go and hook back up to the catenary. So if you think about a low-hanging bridge that the commuter rail just fits in, rebuilding the bridge to get catenary under it is difficult. This model allows us to have catenary sort of where we can and not where we can't. And so over the next couple of years, we hope to learn an awful lot from that. It is certainly in our sights that the Newburyport-Rockport line, which runs through an environmental justice corridor, is sort of a next up on that. So I hope, Ms. Evans, that we're going to learn a lot and can be pivoting our conversations away from those loud trains in your neighborhood to something more modern as well. So Julia, thank you so much for the question. Kat's got something else to add.
There is a lot of work still happening that EPA and the Attorney General's office are absolutely like watching the work on idling very closely. So there are regular inspections. There was a round of inspections just this past summer. The vehicles have gotten better over time. Our vehicle maintenance facility works really, really hard through their overhauls of our historic locomotives to try to get them up to standard. And so they do comply with Tier 2 and EPA emission standards, but we know there's a lot more still to be done. Lynsey mentioned sort of FRA requirements. Our first mandate is always safety. And so I actually learned this recently, but I didn't know that when we can't, it's not like a car, we can't just switch it on and go. I learned that either the conductor or the inspector, once the engine has been switched on, they then have to go and walk the entire train to do a visual inspection of a bunch of components like lights. And then they have to sign a form that certifies that the individual walked the entire train. And so it's things like that where there's just built-in time there and we can't cut that time. Obviously, I think there are opportunities in other situations, but just the amount of time that it takes for the hydraulic pressure in the brakes is apparently also a really big time pressure. So it's making sure that the engine is warm so that it can run well, having the brakes functioning so that they can brake correctly, and even bring the actual sort of root temperature in the cars up to temp. That also takes time. So there's a lot more that goes into idling than people expect. I was shocked to learn how much there is, but there's absolutely more work to be done. So yes, worth continuing the conversation.
Well, thank you for your thorough answers, and you've certainly got your work cut out for you, and I really appreciate you taking the question.
Of course.
We do have our work cut out for us. Some days my spouse is like, "What are you doing?" But
we're all in this together.
Julia,
Yep.
we use a lot of time on that. I don't know if you can fit one more in. We're happy to hang for a minute if you want to try.
Yeah, there was another hand raised. I don't see any other hands raised. And
Okay.
Currently it's 11:59. We have this scheduled until noon. That question did come up in the pre-submission, so I'm glad it was able to be addressed live since it was asked by a few people.
Thank you.
We will provide follow-up to this meeting to everyone who registered with the recording, the slides, the resources that were mentioned here, that some of which are forthcoming. And then there's some of the questions submitted were repetitive and symptomatic of a common concern. So we can do like a little summary address of that, since we didn't have a lot of time in this window to directly answer questions, but hopefully the presentations themselves address them. We tried to be responsive to the questions that were submitted in advance in the presentations. So we're all accessible. Our contact information will be shared. Thank everyone for taking time out of your day on this first day of October to join us for a webinar in partnership with the MBTA. I will just wrap us up with a little pitch for our next learning event. We are doing a series of convenings about the fiscal cliff and the finance situation with MBTA and with transportation more generally. In July, we did host a webinar about how we got to the financial situation that the T finds itself in today. And you may know that the governor has appointed a task force to explore transportation finance options for transportation across the state. We will be convening an event sometime in late November, early December. Stay tuned for that, for ways to really explore what some of those solutions are. MAPC recently released a few white papers looking at things like TNC fees and raising fees on deliveries, parking taxes. The gamut of options is quite wide, and all of these things contribute to keeping the T providing service and keeping the lights on, as well as becoming resilient as we progress in this era of climate change. So stay tuned for that. I will just close us out by saying thank you for joining us. Thank you so much to our speakers for sharing your expertise, and look forward to these continued conversations and work together on this important issue.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
so
for having
much.
us.
Thank you again, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.